When life throws you a curveball, what next?
You're listening to another Torched original. Are you feeling stuck when it comes to creating content for you and your business? Would you like a podcast of your very own? Or maybe you'd like to stand out and reach new audiences? Head to gettorched.com. That's gettorcht.com today, and we look forward to helping you on your content creation journey. And now, enjoy the show.
My next guest, and I say this I reckon every week, but I am super excited generally to have Leah sitting in front of me. Thank you for your time today. I know, life's busy, so I really appreciate your time. Now, before I get into and hand over to you, I do want to share a story. This morning when I was driving to work at 5:45, the most amazing sunrise. It was the beautifulest orange I've ever seen. I just felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude and hope, which I haven't felt for a long time. And I don't know whether it was because the sunrise was so beautiful, or I was excited about talking to you again. So let's go with the latter.
That's it.
So, as I said in the intro, when life throws you a curveball, what next? And we came to first meet through really shitty circumstances for me and my family. But from that came so many nuggets of gold, which is why I've asked you to come on to this podcast, because it's selfish if we don't share what you did for us. And I think the big thing that resonated with me is, like I said, when shit hits the fan, or like I feel like I got hit in the face with a 4x2, how do you get out of when you feel like you can't go on? And you as you beautifully have said, is that you teach people how to look at an issue through a different filter or a new filter, which just I love. And that's what I want the crux of today to be about. But you have, and the reason I've picked a topic, because there's so many things that we could talk about. And, your background is in transformational coaching, NLP, which I'd love to hear more about, and also sociology. You've done personality profiling, all of that sort of stuff. So, very well credentialed, and you're also the author of a 10-year plan. So you do a lot of work with executives, and I just think that's really powerful, obviously, having a business of my own. But I want today to be really focused around that anxiety and how to deal with it, because there's so much of it around at the moment. And, as we come out of this pandemic, and I think you have so much to share. So let me hand over to you, Leah. Go, tell us your passion. Tell us why you do what you do.
Well, I think the way you kind of started with this idea of sort of being able to see things through a different filter, and particularly needing to have that experience where you can do that when you need to. Probably the reason why I do what I do is because in my early 20s, I kind of hit a fork in the road where I had to make some really big decisions about what I was going to do with my life. Like I was working in the field that I studied at uni for, and everything looked great on paper, but there was a part of me that was like, there's no way I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I did the math on it actually, and I worked out that if I work 40 hours a week for, let's say, 40 years of my life, for, let's say, 50 weeks of the year, that's 80,000 hours of time that I was going to be spending doing what I was doing. Anyway, and I was like, I don't want to do that. So
don't do the maths. That would be scary. Or do the maths.
I know. Like it brought it to life for me, what that actually meant.
Wow. Yeah, powerful.
Yeah. So I started doing all this personal development work, which was new to me. I'd never done anything like it. And, I took classes, I did week-long programs, and I did a year-long program, and I got so much value out of it. I kept noticing myself asking, why don't we teach this stuff to people? Because it made such a difference to the way I saw my life. Like, my life didn't change at all, but it was like I was sort of seeing it through a completely different filter.
I love that.
Yeah. And then I just found myself sharing it with people all the time, and it suddenly dawned on me that that's what I was going to do, be the coach.
Isn't it interesting? Did you find, I went through something similar in my 20s, not not by choice. I certainly didn't do the math on what I was doing, but I did have a complete 180 in my career. But did you find doing that personal development stuff quite confronting? Because you can find out some really, stuff about yourself that perhaps you were hiding from.
Yeah.
But if you can push through that and work on it, it can be life-changing, clearly.
Yeah, that's 100% it. It does. It takes some courage to look at that stuff and to not have the world look like it's just a bad world that I then have to deal with, where, in that model you have zero agency in causing anything in your world, really. If you're willing to, and if you've got courage to say, well, like, who am I in this scenario that's perpetuating it or even causing it, that it does take courage, and there's a lot of resistance to it, to actually look there.
So you do a lot of work with executives and couples and people like me that just need you right there and there. But do you find resistance with them as well, or do they come into your services ready and raring to go?
There's definitely a bit of resistance. I think I find, one group of people comes to me because they actually know and they're really ready and they really need something. And they have that openness to look. Probably more with the executives that I work with. I work with groups of executives, so like a networking group of 6, 7, 8, 10 people. And they all come from different places. So someone in the group has decided that they're going to do this program with me, and then they all kind of have to do it. So there's a range of sort of openness to that. And I guess what I think my role is in that scenario is to help people see that, in all areas of life, like no one feels like they're a 10 out of 10 in all areas of life. And it's just an opportunity to look and see. If you could look in 10 years' time and see this area of your life, if it was the same as it is now, or if it continued on the trajectory that it's on right now, how would you feel? And that's a real eye-opener. If they are killing it at work, but their relationship with their partner is a mess, and they see that, the job's going to, earn them zillions of dollars, but they're going to lose their family, their partner, maybe even relationships with the kids, that puts everything into perspective. So looking in that sort of 10-year vision really makes a difference with how people relate to it.
It's interesting when I read on your website about work-life balance. So this has kind of really bugged me for a long time, because I went, how the hell do you get work-life balance? I'm going through the donkey years, as one of my clients puts it, kids at school and business to run and all of that. So your expenses are super high, right? So you kind of don't have the choice. I know what I'd rather be doing, but you've got to do what you've got to do. And then on a day-to-day level, sometimes work has to come first, or sometimes your kids have to come first. So is it that you're, being the perfectionist that I am, is it that you're trying to look for that perfect balance all the time, or is it just in general, so like in a 10-year period, you kind of just being aware that the things that kind of dominate your life, do they serve you? Can you change? Like, can we...
Yeah, look, it is about looking at all areas of life. So I've broken it down into sort of 9 different areas of life. So like relationships, career, social life, finances, impact, travel, hobbies, recreation, and then I've got a sort of a catch-all personal other. And it's about looking at all of those areas and thinking about, what one would be your dream case scenario in each area of life, and what path do you not want to sort of continue on the way it is right now, and creating a plan around it. There's something amazing that happens when you actually create a plan around each area of life where you can honestly say to yourself, if I follow this plan, I will at least achieve the vision I have for myself in 10 years' time.
Does it actually work?
It totally works. It totally works. There's some super cool neuroscience around goal setting, that when you realize what actually happens in your brain when you set a goal, it changes your whole relationship to it.
Yeah. I think the hard part, though, is working out what that goal is. So I just want to go back a step with what you said just before about looking at all areas of your life and identifying the path you don't want to go down. Because I think sometimes it's hard to go, well, what is my goal? Where do I want to be? Is the hard part. But if you peel that back and go, well, where don't I want to be? can be quite powerful in a way.
That's a really good place to start because I think it's really accessible, and I think that's kind of our natural mode is to think about, is to go, well, I don't want to do it like my parents did it, or I don't want to do it, I don't want it to end up bad. I don't want my relationship with my kids as teenagers, to separate. But it's a funny thing because our minds kind of don't really register the negative on something. So if we focus on what we don't want or the worst case scenario, in many ways, it has the reverse effect of what...
You end up doing that.
Well, you do. It's a little bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy, only because if I ask you, if I say, Kirsty, whatever you do next, I really don't want you to picture a big, shiny pink elephant, right? Like, what's the first thing you think of? Yes. Because your mind has to think of what it isn't supposed to think of to even...
There was sorry to interrupt, there was a funny thing. I went on a ski trip just the other week, literally... That exact thing happened. The beautiful person that was trying to teach me a new skill, like to turn, said, now turn. He goes, now don't hit me. And what did I actually went straight at him and ended up, dare I say it, balls in face, going through his legs. It was the weirdest thing. I'm like, how? You just told me not to do that, and I did the very thing. I focused on that clearly. So it's the thing.
It happened because your mind, especially if you're stressed, your mind, he says, don't hit me. Your mind hears, hit me, hit him. Unfortunately, that's what we do.
Yeah, wow.
So goal setting, really, like I was working with a group yesterday, and one of their goals was to not have any debt. I said, that's awesome and beautiful place to start. And if you didn't have any debt, what then would you have? And just really invite people to think about what would be present if the thing you don't want wasn't there, and actually using that language, because it's incredibly powerful. Like, it actually makes a difference.
Interesting. So if we turn this to my scenario when we first met, and, thankfully a beautiful friend put you forward, and within hours you'd taken the call from me, and then the very next day we're sitting around the kitchen table with my family and working through a scenario. So when you are slapped with that curveball, and it can be anything, but really, I'm talking about a curveball that really has a profound effect. You really can't see a way out. What's your advice to people? Obviously, they can engage someone like yourself, which not everyone can do. But how can you look at things differently? Like, it's easy for us to sit here and say, yes, you should do this and you should do that. But when you're in that moment, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is really long.
We don't have that long.
But it's very simple at the same time. So, I remember the work that we did together was very much about thinking about the way we perceive things in the moment. And we are sort of hardwired to do that worst case scenario, to think of the negatives. We're just,
that's all you do. You just go straight to worst case scenario.
Which is kind of our mind's way of trying to protect us, because our mind's job is basically to protect us, keep us alive, and regulate our body systems. And something that's left over from like our ancient ancestors is this assumption that if we experience any kind of anxiety or extreme stress, our mind registers that the same way it kind of would have if we were in a battle 100,000 years ago. Like, we actually get the same chemicals, the cortisol, the adrenaline. We feel it fully through our bodies, and our mind's trying to protect us. But unfortunately, that response doesn't help us. It actually makes it worse. It actually sends us down tunnels.
That's the hole. That's the black hole when you're at the bottom of it. Yeah. It's all stuff that hasn't even happened. That was what was so profound for me. It's like, who says that's even going to happen? Who says that's even a thing? Why am I even thinking like that?
Yeah. And that's your mind trying to figure out what the worst case scenario is, so that it's conscious of that, so that it can protect you from it if it needs to. So it's kind of planning for the worst case scenario. Unfortunately, when you're in that moment and that's what your mind's doing, that just feels like that's your reality, like that's your life. So, the thing to practice through life, which, it's not our default mode to do this, but it's actually to stop and think about it from kind of the logical part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, which is the newest part, it's the thing that makes us different to other animals. It's where we can do rational, logical thinking. And when you get stuck feeling anxiety, it's because you're kind of in the more ancient, primitive part of your brain, where we kind of loop in these cycles of fear and panic, and we don't know how to get out of it because we're not trained to do this kind of stuff. This is one of the things that I'm like, gosh, if people could have some understanding of like what to actually do in that moment. There are things you can do, right?
Breathe, one of them, I would imagine.
Breathing is one of them and the reason why breathing is so powerful is because if you're breathing deep, long breaths, it's a communication to your mind that you must be okay.
Ah, interesting.
Because again, if you think 100,000 years ago and you're taking big, long, deep breaths, it meant that nothing was chasing you, you weren't in a battle, everything was cool. If you're taking short, shallow breaths, it's a communication to your mind that there's danger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what your mind does in that case, it goes, oh, well, Leah must need more adrenaline and more cortisol if she's breathing like that. So you can see how the cycle just perpetuates.
Yes, totally. Oh my God. And so we can breathe better. And something that resonated with me too is to talk about it. And I think people sometimes are in that situation shut down to some extent. So to be able to hear you talk about all those bad things to someone, to your partner, whoever, can really shed light on, okay, well, I've spoken it now. That actually sounds ridiculous. That's probably not going to happen.
That's a great point. I mean, how you said it is probably perfect, that the moment it comes out of your mouth and it has space outside of your own head and you've got a sounding board, whether it's your partner or a coach or anyone, it starts to seem different to you. So that's a really great basic thing that everyone has access to. You notice how it doesn't really, it can help if you're highly trained in affirmations and things like that. That can be a really powerful process. But for the sort of average person, trying to think about things yourself and process it in your own head normally doesn't do the trick. I mean, I need a coach. I can't even coach myself. Like, it's just, I'm in my own blind spot. I can't actually bring that objectiveness.
Yeah, I think, and I've said this for a very long time, is that who's your team? You know, we all need a team. A business has a team. I've got a team here today. You can't do this on your own. Correct. So why is it that we don't, as people, have a team? Is it?
Oh, that's a great question.
Like, it just, like you said, it's simple, right? But and I've said this on a podcast before, we complicate the hell out of everything. You know, it's really not that hard. So go back to affirmations, because something I've never really gotten into. I've got my beautiful girlfriend at Christmas gave me, I think it was my birthday actually, which is around Christmas, unfortunately, gave me this book of affirmations. And I remember when I got it and I sat there for, the next half an hour just reading the affirmation, loved it. And then I've sort of put it down again. How do they work with the brain, like the affirmations? Is that, again, putting the positive thing out there that you want, or is that just getting into that daily practice of looking positively on life when perhaps you're not feeling it?
Yeah, look, I mean, so many points that you just made I think we could speak to. But essentially anytime you have a thought of any kind or have any kind of experience, a neural pathway gets created in your brain. And when you read an affirmation that is new to you, so your experience when you read those for the first time, they really landed for you like it was something new and fresh and probably really inspiring. And the more times you repeat a thought, the deeper that neural pathway becomes embedded. So you can see how a mindset gets created by having repetitive thoughts over and over and over. Affirmations, if you use them intentionally to intentionally create a different mindset about yourself. So for example, if a child is told all their life that they're worthless and they're not going to amount to anything, the first time they heard that, little neural pathway got created, which probably hurt a lot, felt terrible, but the more it got said and the more that got repeated through life, the deeper it became ingrained. And by the time that child graduates from high school or even finishes high school, that original thought now just feels like their reality because it just feels like who they are to them.
It's your experiences shape your beliefs, your belief system. So if that's your belief that you're silly or you're stupid or you're not good enough, that will resonate if you keep saying it to yourself.
Correct. And that's the good news as well, though, because, you know, if you use affirmations with that child and have them create a sort of a set of affirmations that for them, when they read them, they think, if I felt that way about myself, I would feel like a totally different person. And if they repeat those to themselves, it's so simple. But every time they repeat that, it creates a new neural pathway. And that one starts to get bigger and bigger. And as that one gets bigger and bigger, the other one starts to fade away, which means you can actually change how your whole brain is wired and how you experience yourself. There's a great book called, I think it's called The Brain That Changes Itself.
Okay.
And it's all about how plastic our brains are, neuroplasticity. And this doctor does these amazing bits of research around people whose brains have literally like changed their configuration, their physical presence to adapt to physical challenges, mental challenges. It's incredible. But yeah, they used to think our brains kind of, you know, developed until the age of about 25, and then they plateau until we're about 80 when they start to deteriorate. And now they know that our brains are just simply
ever evolving
completely.
Yeah. So is that where it just came to me, you know, schools now use that word growth mindset. You know, Charlie, you need a growth mindset. And I keep looking at him thinking, what the hell does that mean? But is that essentially staying positive, believing that you can learn whatever it is that's in front of you? It's that type of scenario.
Yeah, exactly. That's like as a parent, one way you can encourage a growth mindset in a child is to, when you acknowledge them, you say, Charlie, you did a great job on that, as opposed to, which means he actively had to do something to have that achievement, as opposed to saying, Charlie, you're such a good boy, which presumes that he's got something naturally inbuilt that he doesn't have any agency over. He's just lucky, or that's what he was born with, or that kind of thing. So encouraging that sense of, you know, that he has caused that.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so many things that are going through my mind right now that comes to, you know, I've seen and been guilty of, that just, maybe this is another podcast, but, you know, in kids' sport, and I think because of who we see at the training studio, we do a lot of work with kids, you know, teenagers, preteens and teenagers who have a negative association with exercise, for example. And it didn't dawn on to me until I've seen my kids go through it, where you see some coaches, and it's not their fault, that's just what they've been taught, and I've been guilty of that as well. But, you know, if they're not listening, or the punishment is, you know, 2 laps of the oval, or, you know, drop down and give me 50 push-ups because you were late. It's kind of that creating those pathways to say, well, actually exercise is a punishment.
Yeah.
And therefore, if that happens, you know, if they're not good at sport, or if they're just a bit, you know, not one of those that gets caught off with the fairies, that can create a negative pathway. It's like rewarding food for a good job, or alcohol because you've achieved something. It's all of that that kind of learnt behaviours, but it's really those transmitters that are...
Yeah, absolutely. And your point about the coach using, you know, laps or push-ups as a punishment, I mean, you think how confusing that would be in a subconscious way for a child to be going to do a physical sport activity, and then because they're late, they're punished by more physical sport. I mean, think how confusing that would
bizarre.
be. Yeah.
Seriously, I want to do a whole podcast on that one topic, because I think that needs to go out to a lot of coaches and parents and people around. So can you just touch a little bit on I just remember you, and I know it's hard because we're on a podcast, but you had us doing a little scenario of, and I thought this could be a good drill for people to understand is, you know, when you're looking at the problem, you got us to write down all the negatives and then the opposite
Yeah.
Is that how I mean, there was so much going on at that time.
Yeah, that's definitely what it was. So it's a model that I use around like how to create perception as opposed to rely on your default mode, which normally is quite negative and quite sort of overly protective of us. And, you know, it means well, but what ends up happening is that we feel terrible and then we end up acting out of those negative thoughts and those terrible feelings and doing things that kind of perpetuate and create that looping cycle. So normally I'd have a big whiteboard or a nice big piece of paper to draw this out. So I'm gonna do it in a way that I hope makes sense. But we could include maybe a PDF.
Yes. Yep. We can definitely do
so
that.
People
Show
could refer
notes,
to that. Yeah. So the idea is that anytime anything happens in the world ever, we have an instant reaction to it. So it could be something as simple as I hear tires squeal on the road outside, or it could be that it starts to rain, or it could be that, you know, I got a phone call from someone and they gave me bad news. Anytime anything happens, let's call that an event. So something happens in the world. The very first thing we do as human beings, we can't help it. It's always going to happen. We decide what it means that that thing happened. We decide that it's either good or bad that it happened, that it's right or wrong. So we have our morality and our judgment come into it. We have our opinions about it. Whenever this happens, whenever an event happens, we instantly make it mean something. And what we typically make things mean is that there's something wrong with us that it happened, or that there's something negative in the world that it happened. So, for example, when it starts to rain, what do you think is the normal...
Oh, that'll be right. It's raining. Just, of course it's raining because I need to go for my run or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Not that I wasn't that beautiful. It's raining.
Correct. Like
unless it's at night, you go, thank God it's raining. I could go to sleep. Depends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our default, I mean, think about it like this. Think about if you went over to your friend's house and you saw on her bench an invitation to a party from a friend, a mutual friend, and based on the date that she got that, you know in that moment that you didn't get one of those invitations.
Yes.
What you'll do instantly, without having to try, is you'll make that mean something. You'll interpret that. What do you think you would make that mean?
Why didn't I get invited? I'm not good enough. She doesn't like me.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where people normally go. And so when something real in our life happens that, you know, we find ourselves doing that negative default response to, this sort of way of thinking through it is really helpful, because if you think more about that invitation and you think, what else could it mean? Like, once you get all that stuff out of your head, like, you know, she doesn't like me, I'm not good enough, you know, maybe I did something wrong, you know, our friendship never meant anything to her, I was fooled the whole time, like all those things.
And I'm sure everyone can relate to that.
Oh, totally.
That's whether you're, you know, 48 like me, or 47 I think I am, or if you're, you know, kids in particular do that, you know, when they're 8 or 9. Yeah.
100%. But just work with me here. Like, what else could you make it mean? That
it got lost. Australia Post pretty average these days.
Yeah.
Could have got lost. She could have just forgotten.
Yeah.
She might have needed my email address and didn't have it, but then forgot to follow up.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be anything.
It could be.
Yeah. Maybe I did do something wrong.
Well, maybe
she had a certain amount of places that she could only invite, or I mean, there could be a lot of different reasons.
Could have been, lots of different reasons.
It's got nothing to do with me necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the difference. You know, our gut instant reaction is to believe that it is about us. You know, when we have those,
it's the ego.
It is.
The first ego is, it's all about, in fact, my family gave me a sign that says it's all about me, which is now it was inside, now it's outside. But your first ego in life is you. Then you learn to share that. Yeah.
And kind of similar to what we were talking about before, like when we have all those negative worst case scenario thoughts, that's our mind trying to protect us, trying to protect us from what would be the worst case scenario in this. And as long as it feels like it's got all those figured out, and if that does eventuate, it'll know how to protect us. That's what's happening there. It takes something. It takes manually transporting yourself out of that and into what else is possible. And that's where you start to see that it's not all about you, that you start to have empathy. You start to be curious. You start to think, well, maybe I did do something that I don't realize. Maybe when I sent her my invitation to the party last year, maybe she never got that. And maybe that's why she didn't come. And you start to open up and you feel different. Like, think about the feelings that you have when you say, I'm not good enough. She doesn't like me. She never did like me. I was fooled the whole time.
Heavy.
You feel heavy. And what else? What other feelings come up?
Anger. Just shit.
Yeah, you just feel. Yeah. And so what's really, really curious then, if you go back to sort of the top and you think, well, maybe she didn't have my email. Maybe it was like a specific kind of get together for, all the parents.
Certain friends or
basketball. Or
exactly, yeah.
What feelings get elicited for you there?
Well, you feel lighter, number one, and you take the emotion out. The emotion's now gone because there could be lots of reasons that's got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
So, and that brings me to another point that you taught me back then is you can't control what you can't control. You can't control what others do, their actions, what they say, anything like that. And 9 times out of 10, it's got nothing to do with you anyway, really, when you think about it. Like, I think back to everything that's happened in my 47 years and how many big events I thought had something to do with me that actually have nothing to do with me. And you just getting back to that focus on what you can control, and what you can control is how you respond in those situations.
Yeah. Exactly. And how you perceive of them, like even at that level, because the response actually comes next. So the first thing that happens is the event happens, you don't have an invitation, you make it mean that you're a bad person, no one likes you, and the friendship was never real. Then you manually take yourself to the top of what I call the circle, where you see, actually, I have no idea, but it could be anything. It could be the kind of party. It could be that it's lost in the man. And then what happens from there is that you feel different. You feel lighter. You feel open. And the thing that comes next, after you have your feeling and your thoughts about what happened, is what you actually do in the world, your behavior, your response, as you just said. And your response coming from that lightness and that compassion, understanding, empathy, curiosity is totally different.
Totally. Less aggressive. Oh, maybe everyone needs to learn the circle out there.
Yeah.
Right now.
It's honestly, if I could share one thing with the world, it would be that, because I just feel like it's what my experience with people is that it gives them a sense of agency around something that is normally feels like it's just who we are, what we do, our thoughts, what we think. And when you really start to work through this model, which I'm super happy to show you, you can use it in everything for the rest of your life.
Oh, I have since that was back in 2019 when we first met. I apply it to everything, and I've heard over the years, take the emotion out of an email or whatever, or take a breath or sit on it before you act. It's kind of a similar thing, but what I was missing was the circle, the tool, the how to do it. So that'd be awesome if we could.
Oh, that'd be so much fun.
Oh,
be so much fun to do that.
People just need to get that. So, now tell me about you're the author of your 10-year plan. For me, I can't think what I'm doing next week.
Yeah.
So to think forward 10 years, is it that in depth, or because I think you do need a plan, like especially when you're maybe not in your 20s. I think you're kind of just having fun and finding out life. But when you do get to this end, like I kind of think, oh my God, is it too late? Like what what next, and which is one of the main reasons for this podcast. There's been so many little events that's like, oh my God, I'm at that stage. What next? When they say midlife crisis, it kind of is that thing. So to avoid people having midlife crisis and spending lots of crazy money on cars or finding another wife or whatever it is, what is that about? Talk to me.
I just have to touch on something though, because you've mentioned your age a couple times, and what you just said about midlife crisis. Your 50s are the best because you've got just your wealth of experience,
your knowledge, your circle,
your intuition.
Understand.
You start to trust your intuition for the first time.
Yeah,
that was my experience.
Yeah,
you have got, and look at you. I mean, you are on the most amazing trajectory for the most brilliant 50s.
Bring on the 50s,
I
nifty
just had
50.
to put that
Well, my
in
husband will be 50 this year, so I'm sort of touching 50.
You're good. You're right in there. Oh, it's a great. It's. I mean, I work with a lot of people who assume that they would have been had their retirement on track by sort of mid 50s, and they're like, oh, it's kind of just starting. It starts and it not just starting from the beginning where it's that real, the really hard work. It's just starting to really flow is what it is. So the 10-year plan, I mean, it is a different process of thinking than a 1, 2, or 3 year plan, which really at the end of the day, they're great because they help you feel really organized. And I think the difference is that they end up feeling a little bit more like a to-do list than what the 10-year plan is actually supposed to sort of try to create, which is a vision for your life, to think in that time frame and think, gosh, if I could take my career, for example, from where it is now, if I could picture my dream case scenario in 2032, where would I be over the moon to have it in 10 years' time?
Oh, see, I just find that really overwhelming to think about, which is interesting.
Yeah, I get that.
Obviously, there's steps.
There are steps to it.
Yeah,
and it's. I suppose if there's a willingness to let yourself dream, and not have to figure out how you're going to achieve this dream before you decide what your dream is. That's a huge thing, because I think what we tend to do is we tend to want to set goals or have a dream that we've figured out how we're going to achieve it. Otherwise, it's scary.
Yeah.
It's so scary. If you can actually say, well, even though I don't know how I'm going to achieve that in 10 years' time, it occurs to me it's possible. It can't be so wild.
Crazy.
I'm going to put a disco on Mars in 2032 and you're all going to be backing me for it, right?
We'd be rocking it. I'll come. don't lose my invite. If I don't get one, I'll be sure to ask you for one. We'll start this chain of events when people aren't invited to things. People go, why didn't you invite me?
Yeah, exactly. Coming from a perfectly fresh, open space. There we go. So you have to be able to relate to it it's possible. It can't be a total pipe dream. But it's kind of crazy how people will not land on a dream, a vision for their life, a goal naturally, by themselves in their own sort of blind spot. They won't land on something unless they've already figured out the steps to achieve it. And if you think about that, it limits what's really possible for you. Even when I work with people on 10-year plans, for them, their 10-year goals seem gigantic. But I get calls back 3.5 or 4 years is my average. After I've done 10-year plans, they've achieved those goals that felt massive.
Wow.
And part of it's just that process of actually saying it and allowing yourself to have the goalposts.
Okay, I'm signing you up tomorrow. I know.
But there's also some of the cool stuff that happens in your brain when you set a goal. It gives you traction and it fast tracks what is even really possible. So,
okay, you're convincing me.
Well,
because you hear goal setting all the time. Like everyone's
Yeah.
goal setting. I've got a goal, and we do it in health and fitness. You got a goal, and but unless you really believe it and commit to it and put the steps in process in place, you're not going to get there. And I think that sounds what the missing step is. So there's the goal, and then what's the to-do list to get there?
Yeah.
And you got to really want it, right?
Yeah, totally.
You got to want to change. You got to want to do the work. What do they say? If it's worth fighting for, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then you won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is having people sort of really land on what they really want as opposed to what they think they should be doing. Or
there's a big one.
Yeah.
Whatever, what's expected of you, or just being calm and really understanding what it is that you truly want.
Yeah, letting all the the noise kind of dissipate and listen to that. That's a big part of the process.
Love it. Well, I think there's lots of little chunky bits in there. I think the big message, well, for me, my take has affirmations. I'm going to give them a go because I've got plenty of them. And just keep practicing the stuff that I can control. And next time I don't get an invite, I'll be asking that person, where the hell's my invite? Not really, but thank you, Leah. We can find you. I think you mentioned you got a TikTok account.
I do.
I love that. I've only just started a TikTok account, which will be
Get amongst it.
Oh my God.
It is such a good platform. I thought it was going to be all kids dancing to music when I got on, but it's just the format, the content.
Love it.
Google
so
your
what's your TikTok? What do they call it? Is it a handle?
Yeah, my channel. I'm not sure what it is. It's just at Leah Davidson Coaching.
Love it. And then you've got your website, leahdavidsoncoaching.com.au.
Correct.
Yes. And I'll put all your contact details in as well. So if people want a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan, or couples, I know you do work with couples as well, which is kind of cool.
Yep.
I think there's a few couples I know that could do with some work. Not really.
Don't we all?
I'll send them your name. No. Thank you so much for making the effort today.
Oh my gosh, it's been so much fun. It has flown by.
It has. And until next time.
Amazing.
Thanks, Leah. Thank you for joining us on this episode of What Next? I'm Kirsty Robbie, and if this episode sparked any questions and you want to know more, please hit us up on our socials at whatnext_with KR, and have a great day.
You're listening to another Torched Original. Are you feeling stuck when it comes to creating content for you and your business? Would you like a podcast of your very own? Or maybe you'd like to stand out and reach new audiences? Head to gettorched.com. That's GETTORCHT.com today, and we look forward to helping you on your content creation journey.